Thanks, Cade. Hey guys, I'm Laura. I'm a designer and front-end developer. I'm currently working at a startup called Clover, which is fintech. Previously, I spent 2 years in a startup that was in the medical space, and that's sort of where this talk comes from. So basically, I'm here to ask you guys, dude, where is my tricorder? And there's a little disclaimer that there's actually several tricorders out on the market right now, but they all suck and they're just gimmicks. So just quietly, yeah, I know there are actually things, but they're not the real thing. They're not the magic, ooh, look, you have tuberculosis and you need this. So yeah. So let's talk about tech as a whole. Right now, we're in this weird space where some verticals are going like wildly fast, and others seem stuck in the past. Now, this lady's got a little radio pager. I hope you can see that. And like essentially, radio paging is from the 50s. It's one-way. It's non-encrypted. It's this terrible little character box UI interface. Is that my earrings? I'm going to take them out. God, that's awful. Sorry. Let's just do one, and then I'm like totally badass. So yeah, like hospitals, there's lots of other verticals like education, government. I'm sure you have many in your brains that are slow to adopt the pace of change that we're seeing in other spaces. So whose fault is this? Well, I'm here to say it's big and it's complex and it's any person's fault, but there is a ton of literature on the web. I'm going to share these slides after, so if you want to read any of these links, there is an enormous amount of introspective, nasal-gazing, like technology blogs and articles that are like, oh, Silicon Valley, why you so suck? Why engineers make stupid product? Well, okay, yes, it's hard. So I'm going to say, I think it's not a get blame thing. It's no one person's fault. It's big systems. And to be fair, hard problems are hard, right? Like, if we are trying to tackle a big, complicated, convoluted system, it's very hard even to look at it and break it down to a small piece and go, well, this is the thing I can tackle. Also, it's a business model problem. So investors like a scope that's small and contained, and they like business models they understand, and that's retail traditionally, right? Like that's things that they've seen succeed, like Uber and Airbnb. So what we have to do is not just disrupt an enterprise, but disrupt the business model. So let's think about how we can do that. So if this is a thing that's been on your mind, if you actually want to tackle this, I'll put it to you that technology will be probably like the smallest part of your job, and the bigger part will be fostering that culture of change, both from the business model and VC point of view and inside the enterprise. And it helps you if you know what you're up against. So here it is, my little thesis for 15 minutes, a survival guide for bringing technological disruption to the enterprise. I'm just going to leave that there for a moment, because this is my proudest moment. Picard being amazing. So I'm gonna show you this through the lens of hospitals, but I think, again, it's important. Why this is important is because the problems we're seeing in the world, like economic problems, the rise of capital, the decline of the middle class, the wildly broken political systems we're living inside, like our inability to tackle climate change, all that stuff. These are all problems that are bound up in big, convoluted spaghetti string systems, and it's our job to like think about how we might potentially tackle even a very, very small part of those problems. So here's a first challenge you might come up against in the enterprise space. It is the tender process. Now, if you've done these before, you're about to know what I'm going to say, which is that they're terrible. They're long. They're time and resource intensive for the vendors. They're often written to actually like pick an existing vendor and like cut everybody else out. So that means that if you weren't on the radar before they wrote the tender, it's terrible. They often have really onerous requirements, so if you're a small startup and you've only been in business for a short period of time, it's basically saying, yeah, we're not interested in you, so that's not great. If you've ever been through this experience, it might feel a bit like, oh, hey, I'm here to like feel out the vibe, have a first date, maybe like have a drink, chat, see if we like have things in common and we have problems we're gonna solve together, and then the tender is like, yeah, no, you're gonna be having my baby. So, and again, like, my favorite, this is just an excuse for stupid Star Trek riffs, so yeah, that's what's going on. So they do a lot of prescriptive describing of what you need to supply, and that's just the wrong way to think about things. They should be telling you what the problems are that they're trying to solve, and then let you, the actual experts, think hard about what technology solutions might solve those problems. So a lot of trying to fix this space is telling people how and why tenders are inefficient and poorly designed. So there's a lot of things you can try and do to make tenders better before we can kick them out the door altogether. While you're still in the tendering process, you definitely want to network. You want to get in front of the clients before they even write it. There are ways to deal with the onerous requirements for small business. So for instance, partnering with a big company, like in the health space, there's someone like Telstra Health. There's lots of big companies that are basically really quite happy to put their umbrella so that they can take the glory of being included in this small startup innovation community. So it is worth thinking if that's a good solution for you. You can also try and figure out if they have a purchasing budget which doesn't have a threshold requirement, a tendering requirement, because if you can sneak in underneath that threshold, then you might be able to get your foot in the door, and then when they look for the next big project, you're already on their radar. So, and also, we just need to tell them that these processes are terrible and why, and what kinds of outcomes they'll be preventing themselves from achieving, which is the technology they couldn't even think about to tender for, right? The solution they didn't even know existed. The next problem / challenge / opportunity I want to talk about is the sales cycle. This little link here is basically a long and interesting read if you're interested in the hospital space. It basically talks about how hospital admins make technology purchasing decisions, what are the triggers to get them there, and it's just a lot of terrible things, basically, like patient deaths and stuff like that, which is a thing that they never want to say. They always say, ooh, adverse outcome, but what that means is someone died because something stupid happened. So that's very representative of what happens in enterprise, I think. They're very reactive. They wait for something terrible to go wrong, and then they're like, ooh, maybe we don't have the solution. So in terms of the sales cycle, it can be 6 months, it can be 2 years. It's very long. This is very hard for startups to survive. So if you're going to try and tackle the space, be aware that it's going to be long, and you need to have capital to survive that period of time. So yeah, don't go into this naively. It's really important that you think, what can I do to survive that time, that sales cycle length? There's often a lot of stakeholders who have to rubber stamp the process. Also, in enterprise, they seem to discover technology vendors at trade shows, which is it's kind of old school, but then we have our trade shows as well, which is like CES and the cool big ones in the States. So I don't know. I'm sort of half-half whether that's a good thing or a bad thing versus just finding internet vendors on the internet. But that said, it's good to know that that's where those relationships traditionally form so that you can be in front of their faces. So how can we reimagine the sales cycle? Well, I put it to you that there is a ton of customer acquisition models in retail that we can steal for enterprise. So we have to work out how we can give them potential deals or pricing points that are so appealing they can't refuse. So for an example, you might say, hey, I'm going to wire up my product, fully integrate it into your systems, and you can play with it for 3 months for free. Or maybe it's a year. Sometimes they need a long time to make a decision. Another way is to tie it into a metric, to just say, hey, you have wildly inefficient X, and we're going to see a Y% increase in that metric by using our tool. And if you don't see that improvement, you don't have to pay for it. So there are ways of getting around these sales cycles, and that's being so compelling that they can't say no to you. This is a fun aspect of working in enterprise, where the person who's using your tool is not the person paying for it. And in fact, the person paying for it may never actually use it or see it in production. Now, that's very frustrating, because what can happen is all the standard customer satisfaction and success metrics that we love to use in retail space don't get applied in their thinking when they're making purchasing decisions. So it basically means that whether or not users like the tool, want to use it, and find it easy to use, don't seem to be at the forefronts of their minds when they're making that technology purchase decision. So, all right, that's pretty frustrating. And it also means that the people using your tool might have a little bit of latent frustration and anger because they're used to these top-down decisions being saying, hey, here's this new annoying tool you have to use. And you're like, oh, what do I have to learn now? So imagine like if your app store wasn't you going in and actually installing apps. It was just like, hey, today you have to try all this. By the way, that's your job. So thanks, Andy. So yeah, like for sure, it can be frustrating for people if they're just constantly being handed top-down decision-making. So I think the way that we solve this is to make user success metrics part of the deliverable again. So I think there's a bit of arrogance and there's a short-sightedness on the point of view of those decision makers when they don't think about how much the users want to use the tool or whether it's got good UX or whether it's going to be like an improvement in efficiency. A big way to have a think about this is enterprise traditionally has this phase called UAT, which is user acceptance testing, followed by a user training process. And these can be like literally millions of dollars and months long in like the overall project. Now, if your tool is terrible, everyone's going to be resistant, and this is going to take a lot of time and a lot of like bullying essentially to get people to adopt your tool. If it's really lovely, seamless, intuitive, and the adoption is really fast, you're just going to have all these people on the ground spreading it out. And in fact, theoretically, you shouldn't have to pay for that phase at all. It should just work because people want to use it. Or you get a couple of champions to explain whatever more deep or like powerful feature sets are there, and the basic stuff is already there. You can just pick it up and go. This is a phrase coined by my wonderful partner, Andy. And this is the airport where you have like the premium screening line, and then there's the general screening line. And essentially, this is this weird thing where people go through security, only if you pay a little bit more money, you don't have to take your shoes off. And like, it's like, how can that possibly be preventing a risk or saving people's lives or preventing a danger if you can just pay more money and then not have to do it? So this is like this weird appearance of safety that has nothing to actually do with risk management. And this happens so much in enterprise. Oh, stupid earrings. Take that one off too. All right, so the thing to do here is call it like you see it. So when you see risk management processes that are not working, you just have to shout out. And we do this really well in lean methodologies. We think about what's the best way to get better, and then talk about it, iterate, have a play. We're happy to drop tools really frequently. A good example of how this works in hospitals is there's this method of risk management called the Swiss cheese process, which is like each layer of risk management is like a layer of Swiss cheese, and it's got little holes in them, and like on its own, it's not a useful risk management tool because there's lots of holes, but they have this theory that if you put enough layers up, then you've filled in all the holes, and you're not going to get anything falling through the gaps. And that kind of makes sense, except it assumes that time, energy is infinite resources, that people are like completely forever will have time and energy to like perform those processes. And obviously it's not true. And essentially you end up with a stupid Swiss cheese sandwich that's literally too big to take a bite of. So I found this little quote from this lady in fashion, and it's really spoke to me because I feel like in enterprise, people are very good at sitting in a room and being like, oh, sure, yeah, that sounds reasonable. And in their heads, they're going, gosh, that's just ridiculous. Like, you know, if you've seen the like 7 perpendicular red lines video, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's like people just nodding along and smiling when in fact they're thinking, this is just ridiculous. So I think it's our job in this sector to call out when we see things that are really outrageous or inefficient or really just bad thinking and bad logic. The last problem I want to talk about is when UI complexity is perceived as being powerful or valuable. So this is a bit of a cognitive bias that can happen based on thinking that more things is better, essentially, that like the more you can shoehorn into your interface, the better you are. But when you look at things like hospital EHRs, it's very easy to go, well, how do we even start, right? Like, what's the What's the first thing I do on this screen? And it's just such a mash. It's actually very reminiscent of Rick's design that he showed us earlier. And it's such poor usability design. It's such poor decision making, because what they've done is gone, hey, everything you could possibly need ever is going to go on the interface here. And really what good UX is saying, well, we're going to give you some opinionated defaults about some basic features or some common functionalities we want you to perform, and then we're going to hide away all that complexity and bring it back if and when it's relevant to you. So bring it back in a contextual manner. And that is really the work of a UX designer. They do all that work of thinking hard about what all the pieces are, and then work out when it might be appropriate to show that extra feature or that extra piece of information to the person. So again, how do we tackle this? Get your UX and product people front and center. Let them rabbit on about it in front of your clients during the sales cycle. Actually let them talk about it, because it's important that we bring this thinking outside of retail and into other sectors. Ooh, I'm running over, so I'm going to keep going. So to conclude, I think we can have nice things in enterprise. We just have to fight for them. And I hope I've convinced you that it's important and necessary, and that obviously we want to go to Mars, but also we want to have hospitals that don't suck. So thank you very much. I hope you found this talk engaging. Are you ready for my terrible puns? Hope you found this talk engaging. Please go out there and make it so. And Mike, I'm sorry, but I did this before I saw your slide. Boldly go where no startup has gone before. Thank you for listening. All the slides are up there. There's tons of articles if you guys want to read them. Chat to me in person or on Twitters.